Welcome back to another episode of the Heroes Veritas podcast. I'm your host, Tim Bass, and today I'm joined by a lovely and amazing guest, Dr. Danita Morales Ramos. I believe I said that right, or to most people, Dr. D. She's a motivational speaker, a coach for mindset, assertiveness. She just recently came out with a book, Make Him Feel, Fascinate, and Fancy You, I believe is what it's called. I apologize if I butchered any of this. But I met you at Lions Den Live 2022 that Sean Whalen recently hosted, fell in love with your energy and just I knew I needed to have you on the podcast. So thank you for taking the time and joining me, Dr. D.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you got all of it right. Like my whole government, and you got the book right and everything. Most people were like, Dr. Ramos, Dr. Morales. No, so we're good.
Fantastic. I'm glad I nailed it first try. All right. So obviously I got to see you speak at Lions Den Live 2021, that Sean Whalen gave you a platform to speak at his, and I just fell in love with your story of stepping into yourself, stepping into your power, stepping into who you wanted to truly be. You spoke a lot about like kind of hiding, which is interesting to me because you're such an amazing and inspiring individual. And especially now as an assertive coach and a mindset coach for both men and women, it was ironic to hear you speak about kind of shielding yourself away from people. Can you give us a little background on your story and like how that kind of transpired?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I am a recovered victim, if you will, of sexual trauma and different trauma like that. I had trauma at a very, very young age. That's not my story now, but, since we have to go into history and everything, right? And at the age of 26, I attempted suicide and started this whole therapy thing that people in my culture don't talk about. And it was that therapist that helped me get my voice back that I lost from this trauma. And from there, my journey essentially started. I always knew in like middle school that I was going to be a psychologist. My mother used to tell me, "Who do you think you are, dear Abby?" And so that from 26 until where we are now, it just uncovered more of aspects of myself that I didn't essentially just hide from the world, but I hid from myself, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Very much, actually. There's a lot of correlatives in your story to my growth, especially the mom calling and saying, "Who do you think you are?" And when you're young, especially and you're striving to break that generational curse, it's very easy to become disheartened and deflated by those people that you care most about their opinion, and they don't see your potential yet, or maybe they do, but in their mind they believe that they're helping or they're trying to save you from pain or failure or something like that. And so I very much connect with that call of like, who do you think you are? When I started coaching, when I stepped into doing things my way and living with more conviction, I got that very similar call, or I would get very similar calls of who do you think you are? And so the recovering victim, one thing you said that I absolutely loved is that's not my story now.
Right.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that story can change and that they can change that chapter and they don't have to remain where they were, and they can free themselves. Because I think a lot of people, suicide at 26. I told you, I think I told you at the beginning of this, yesterday I found out that somebody that was close to us passed away very abruptly, leaving behind 2 daughters. And so still more of the story of that is coming out, but to come out of that space and not only realize that you need to adapt new techniques, new survival mechanisms, but also realizing, and I think to me, this is what really shows just how incredible of a person you are. You didn't say, "I created this new person." You said, "I uncovered who I was." You already were this person that was just buried. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear, like, what do you think was like, you said the therapist, but is there something specific that really allowed you to realize that it was an uncovery, not a creation, that you were on the verge of doing?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so much to unpack with what you just said there. So first, let me start by saying this, that as individuals, until you go on a whole, you are always growing and developing. You know, it's this concept, like, especially in America, like we turn 18, we're an adult. Like we just stop growing. No, we're constantly growing and evolving. And I had to, first of all, recognize that I was playing victim. You know, me being strong and outspoken and kind of in your face, I would never have viewed myself as a victim. And so that experience with the therapist at 26 wasn't me unpacking that I learned to play this victim role. It was just essentially unpacking that trauma was playing a place in my life. So it took some years for me to get to the point where I'm at right now. And I would say over the last 4 years is really how my story has just taken a life of its own. That I'm helping people, and my first tagline was living unapologetically, making no apologies. And I still do that. But then I start noticing this pattern of things that was going on with the clients that were coming to me. I kept hearing my story just with a little bit of different details. And I recognize that you only attract who you are. So I had to start really observing, like, why do these stories and why are these clients, I'm sorry, and their stories align with me. And so while I'm giving therapy, all of a sudden I'm journaling and I'm tapping into D, and I'm like, oh shit, this applies. Why does it apply? And so essentially I added on this thing that I transform victims into victors, because the commonality was all of us, not me now, but all of us had this victim story. Oh, my past trauma. Like even when I would date or meet people, I'm like, oh, I just want to let you know, that was sexually abused at 12 and and blah, 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 blah. That's that victim. Like I need to let you know right away that I'm broken. Well, now that I'm a victim, no, I'm not broken. What I had was some life experiences that make me super good at what I do.
No, that's a phenomenal way to look at it. That's a phenomenal way to look at it. And I think a lot of people never make it to victor because they hold on to that story so heartily, right? They can't let it go. Their identity becomes wrapped around it. And it's important that we have people like yourself in that space who's gone through similar experiences. Like you say, you attract who you are. And the reality is that you can show the light. You can be the lighthouse for people that no longer want to hold on to that identity, and they truly want to move forward with whatever identity that they really want to do. I do something very similar in my men's groups, as well as in my one-on-one clients, is I teach them the origin story. And it's week one and we cover everything that they've had. And I'm like, okay, that's who made you here. Then week two, who do you want to become? And we start putting all of our energy into that next person. And that's that metaphorical turning of the page where it's like, yeah, I get it. I know you now. I know that space and who became this person that stands in front of me. But now that you've accepted that's who you are, that doesn't mean you have to accept that for the remainder of your life. Like you said, you're always growing. And I like to say life is the game that can only be played. It can never be won. And it's this constant growth, next level, leveling up, growth experience and shifting and how you apply it. And it's such a beautiful thing to hear from that space, a very similar resonation echoing back at me, right? Like, and it really does bring home this like kind of humanity to things where it's like, okay, like we don't have the same life, we didn't experience things the same way, but yet we did, right? We perceived
the details are just different. It's the details are just different, and changing that story is so subtle. You don't have to have been sexually traumatized. You don't have to have been physically traumatized for people to have traumatized themselves. So you have big T trauma. That's boom. I've been in war. I've been sexually abused or whatever. Then you have this little T trauma, is the ways that we re-traumatize ourselves that has the bigger impact. And it happens in such subtle ways. Like one of my clients is working on losing weight. This person weighs over 300 something pounds. And the first week that we began working together, and I'm like, hey, as far as their weight, I'm like, hey, if you want to do this, this can happen. And they came back and they were doing some things and they was telling me, oh yeah, but I really want to eat these things. I'm like, okay, the 300 and something pound you wants to eat that but that's not where you're going. You're going to under 200. So we need to eat as if you're under 200. That simple mind shift of where am I going? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to become? You can change that in an instant. Many people think it takes years and years to get over trauma or years and years to get over your story. No, you just need to see yourself where you want to go.
Yeah, 100%. I think Tony Robbins is the one that says you can make a decision in 4 seconds or less. Yep. Just making that decision, and that one decision changes your entire outlook. And something you said just now is that subtle changes, that one thought process change of almost like dressing for the job you want, not the job you have, applies here, right? And it's funny, that story echoes with me too. I was 300 pounds, and it was literally a 10-second decision when I decided to lose that weight. Mine was physiological. My knee gave out. I go to the doctor, who was also a Marine. I was a Marine. And he's like, listen, I'm going to be very candid with you. You're just too fat. Your knee, there's nothing wrong with it. It just can't, this is literally his words. It just can't handle your fat ass. I went to the gym that day. I changed that decision right in that moment. And I had all the stories. I grew up on sugar. I grew up drinking soda. I was addicted to soda. I had all these things that I felt was stopping me. I had a sedentary job. I was busy all the time. But in that moment, it was, your legs aren't going to work for you. And I just got out of a wheelchair about a year or two earlier. So like, I was like, well, I'm not going back to the wheelchair. So I'm going to make this decision, and I've stuck with it. I bounce here and there, but I've never got back up to that level. And it's that concept that you said of like, you can make that decision of seeing where you can go and removing all the roadblocks that you are self-imposing. You're effectively self-diagnosing your failure. That doesn't really exist, right? Once you turn that page.
Remember when you talked about the people holding on to the pain, right? And that holding on to the pain, the person's just holding on to it so tight, and that pain is that story. And oftentimes the reason why people are holding on to that pain, one of the reasons is they want somebody to write the past. There's no writing the past. Like, I'm like, that shit sucked. It hurt. Yeah, let's accept. I'm not saying your parents are right. I'm not saying this person that hurt you is right or wrong. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is the fact that you're holding on to something that no longer exists is costing you your quality of life right now. And so that story, that holding on, I was 200, you probably saw me post it, I was 260, the biggest I got was 268 pounds. That's almost 300 pounds, right? And my story wasn't that I couldn't lose the weight. It was more of I'm big boned and blah, 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 blah. And I pretty much eat healthy and all these other lies, still hanging on to the story of I don't really want to do the work that it takes. And that work is that mind shift. That work is letting go of the story. That work is letting go of excuses and really acknowledging what it is that you want in your life. That similar pain with your knee, mine was in my back from 2 car accidents. Then I got 4 babies that I had. Like, I got all the excuses, but the bottom line is, did I still want to be fat?
Yeah. Do you or don't you?
Right. Is it working for me or is it not? Does it serve me or does it not? Like, people look so much at right or wrong. Forget right or wrong. Is it self-helping or is it self-disturbing?
Yeah. One of the things, there's 2 things that I want to unpack out of that, because that's amazing. The first is the holding on to the story, and kind of those stories that we tell ourselves. I heard this a long time ago, and it fixed my relationship with my mother, actually, because my mom was not the beaver mom. We grew up real poor, so like I had all these resentments towards her because of things that had happened. And Tony Robbins said this thing, and I'd love to get your opinion on it, is if you give them your detriment, you have to give them the grace of your greatness.
Oh, I agree with that. I've never said it that eloquently. I'm gonna have to look up that quote. Yes, that's so from a clinical psychologist. So from a theological aspect, this is what how I kind of help clients go through that. So their story is, I heard a lady similar today, she's saying the same thing, but the story is, my life should have been different. My parents should have been different. My lifestyle, blah, 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 blah. And so I'm like, okay, that's from a child's view, right? When you're 2, you're 3, you're 5, or whatever. But now that you're an adult, right? Could you understand? Doesn't mean you agree with them. Could you understand how your parents, like I tell my kids, you didn't come out of cake box. They didn't tell me how many eggs I needed, how much oil or whatever, whatever. I was trying to figure it out. It's not an excuse, it's just what it was. Could you see how being poor may make a parent need to spend more time trying to make money, may be living in depression and, from their circumstances, whatever the case may be. As an adult of sound mind, can you add more to the story besides woe is me as a kid, is essentially what Tony is saying.
Yeah, 100%. And the way that it was framed in the talk that I saw was that if you had a always home nurturing mother, you probably wouldn't be as self-reliant as you are now.
Absolutely.
If you had a rich upbringing, you probably wouldn't be as resourceful as you are now. And I look at my life and I look at the way that I've done things and built myself, and I have a great working relationship with my parents now, and I love them to death. And I'm very grateful for the lessons that they gave me, good, bad, and indifferent. I have now taken the blessing of where they were to create who I am today. And I've built upon that. And I have nothing but love and admiration for them as a result. But for a long time, I was stuck in that space of like, oh, well, I didn't get hugged enough. Oh, well, I grew up poor. Oh, well, I didn't have this. Yeah, good. Because now I know how to do more things than most people. I can speak to experiences that most people don't have at my age. I'm a phenomenal coach. I can help people through a lot of issues. The only reason I was able to do that was because my life wasn't peaches and cream. Because if it was, I wouldn't have depth. I wouldn't have dimension. And so that really, like the way you framed it just now of, can you flesh out that story, I think is super critical for maintaining what I call personal sovereignty. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not able to flesh out that conversation as an adult and say, let me look at where they were, then you're always going to be shackled to that story. You will always be shackled to their limitations, not your own limitations.
Mm-hmm. So let's look at the little trauma part, right? And it doesn't have to be trauma, but just since we've already been talking about that. So a lot of the question is like, oh, okay, so if I don't have the story, now what? Well, it doesn't mean that this story doesn't ever pop back in your head. It doesn't mean, that you don't have this woe is me thing. Sometimes it does. It creeps in when you're having a conversation with your partner. You're talking to your kid, you're talking to someone in the store or whatever, and having that awareness of how it may represent itself in your life, that is even more powerful, because sometimes you might not be vulnerable because you tell yourself you're not good enough because I was poor. I'm not good enough because I was sexually abused. I mean, how that plays out, So I just want to be careful and adding more context, because someone might be listening and say, well, y'all, Dr. B, that's great. I got rid of my story, but my relationships still suck. Or my life, I'm not doing the greatest in my life. Yeah. So how have you allowed the story to hinder you from that growth is also important. So once you lose the story, still recognize how remnants of it can represent itself in his life, in your life.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into the second point that I was going to ask you about, is the audit system that would need to happen agnostic of the story, right? Like, yeah, that from, this moment in this conversation before, we can't change that. So what are those tools moving forward, whether you can define that story, flesh it out or not, can you use to audit the future you to get you to that point where you want to be? Because obviously, if we're talking, and I say this to my clients, if we're talking, you're not happy with where you want to be. If they're talking to you, there's probably something that's missing, something that's not there. So what does that audit system look like in your professional opinion for people who maybe realize that their story is holding them back, whatever that story is? How do they, like, what are some first baby steps to getting out of that identity issue with, this is me, I am my story, I can't let it go?
Mm-hmm. Go dark deep into that story, and ultimately that story is you. When clients come in to see me, it's always funny because I always give everybody a disclaimer after after they start telling me their stuff, and I'm like, okay, basically we're going to be working together and it's a partnership. Are you open to a direct in your face type of therapist? Because if you are, then we're going to get things done a lot quicker. And so it could be in some type of networking group or support group. It could be with a coach. It could be with a therapist. It could be with a healthy group of friends where you put yourself in an uncomfortable position to have someone else besides your eyes because you're too close to the story to expose you. That could even be a relationship, like making yourself vulnerable and like, oh, I'm not going to date anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. No, or you're already in a relationship, like listening. So putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation where you're okay with someone challenging you on this thinking process. And so when someone comes in to see me, they're telling me, oh, why are you here? Well, I got this free benefit through my job, or, you know, COVID's been doing this to me. I'm like, okay, now that you gave me your elevator spiel, why are you really here? Let's talk about why you really, what made you pick up the phone and make the call, right? Let's start there. And what I find out is that I have to help them go down levels and levels and levels and levels. Remember I said that this lady at 26, therapist, helped me to use my voice. I was only on the top floor then. I'm 45 now. So it took me several years to really get down, and maybe I'm still not all the way down, but I'm a lot more deeper in that. So going into that darkness of not just asking for help, taking the time to journal. Like I think we talked about, I don't remember if it was actually just on the call or pre-call, because we had a call plus a call, right? But it's that language. Our language is indicative of our thoughts, and our thoughts are ignited by these emotions that many of us have learned to press down and not acknowledge. And I say that our emotions are our internal signal of what we want and or don't want, or a combination of the two. But so many people are so emotionally dysregulated that they don't know what they want. And so that's why I hang on to the story. If I hang on to the story, I don't have to deal with my feelings, right? So asking for help, right? Being open to really tapping into what is going on with you, whether it's through journaling, whether being out in nature. You know, Dr. D loves to walk, right? Taking on new hobbies, using the creative side of your brain. Journaling is using the creative side of your brain. I don't care if you don't have subject-verb agreement, drawing, nature, any type of creative aspect of that. And then, I mean, I can give you tons, but then also just really being open to the process. This is what people say to me when I tell them, you just have to decide. We talked about that earlier. It's not the process, it's the decision, right? But then once I make the decision, it's like, I think it's like when I drive through the drive-through, I expect to hurry up and get immediate results. No, you got to sit in that thing. No, you got to gain more awareness about that thing, how it's playing out, or whatever the case might be. So trusting the process of where you're trying to go.
Grace is really what I'm hearing. It's that great, like you said, 26 to 43, like that is grace to continue that process, make the mistakes, learn and audit accordingly, and improving that auditing, right? And it's funny because we have such an aligned and kindred spirit as far as energy goes. And I'm listening to you talk, and it's just like, it's my words with different language. Right? Like you said, you're too close to story. I tell my people, you're too close to your legend. Legendary people don't realize they're legends. They just do the next right thing. Like digging deep, sitting in the darkness. I talk about bringing order to chaos, like in your darkness. Like there's so much kindred spirit and speech in this concept. And like you said, we were talking about earlier, thought is quantifiable through speech. It is what takes root. And one thing you said is it could be a healthy group of friends. And I think a lot of people, they get stuck in sharing stories with the wrong people.
Oh, yeah.
And when that happens, it revalidates the story.
Yeah,
and if you're not seeking the right people and the healthy relationships to share that story, it will always be revalidated.
I tried to do this, daily video or whatever on social media. And I tried to do it today, and I kept getting tongue-tied, but now I know why, because this is where I was supposed to say that. There's 3 levels of people that Dr. D believes there is. So you have your level 1. Those individuals are complacent. Okay, they're fine where they're at. That's your misery loves company. Doesn't mean they're always unhappy, but if you start getting with your, I'm doing my personal development, I'm bettering me, they'll quickly tell you, no, we're comfortable here. And so you either stay there or you go to level 2, right? Those aren't the level 1 aren't individuals that you're going to say, hey, I'm getting ready to try to get rid of my story. All right. Then level 2 is the area where I try to stay in most of the time. This is the growing stage, right? This is, you know what? I just don't like being complacent, but I'm not at the top of my game yet. So I'm growing. And so you have to be careful at level 2 because it's real easy to feel a little lonely because you're at a new stage and new, you know, whatever. And so you start looking back down there at level 1 and you're like, and then you start growing a little bit, and then you're looking up at level 3, and you're like, right? So if you really surround yourself, eliminate level 1, and you stay at level 2 and kind of teeter-totter a little bit at level 3, you'll be good to go. So here's level 3. Those are the winners, right? And none of us is winning all the time, right? But those are the winners. They're constantly expanding or what have you. So if you're not in a group of 2s and 3s, then you're complacent and you're there and you have this story. And so those are the individuals, if you ever hear them in a grocery store, you hear them in a business thing, they complain about everything. They got the answer for everything, you know, or it's excuse for everything. Victim, victim, victim. Level 2s is like, yeah, you know, my life sucks. You know, I was abused and so on, so on, so. But you know what? You know, I'm going to this thing. I'm going to this group. I'm on this podcast. Like, I'm reading these books. I ain't got it all figured out yet. Level 3 is like, hey, I can help you. Is that making sense?
Yeah. And again, once again, just complete echoes exactly what I talk about those levels all the time. I have a whole chart for when I'm helping men. There's man, kings, and heroes. Level 1's the man. They just want to be in the mud. They want to do what they got to do. They're very complacent. They don't care about learning. They think their lot is their lot. Kings are always growing. They're always surrounding themselves with other kings. They're trying to build their table. They're trying to invite the right people into their circle. And they're constantly moving. And the heroes are the guys that have already built the kingdoms, and we're looking to be them. And so we're trying to get invited to their tables. So those 3 levels have a lot of resonation with the way that I train as well, because when you can break it down, it creates a space where you can learn how to get out of that space. A lot of times, myself included in my story, like I felt lost a lot going from 1 to 2 because I was married and she was a good person, but complacent, and I was looking to be better. And it created a lot of friction in that relationship because I had to balance like being accepted in that space and being around the people that we were friends with, and still wanting to be in group 2 and grow and build and learn. And it created a lot of contention, and I strayed from the contention in the worst way. Instead of holding conviction and saying, no, I'm a 2, I'm going to stay a 2, I'm going to strive for 3. I allowed them to turn that thermostat down, as Ed Milet puts it, and bring me back down to mediocrity, and just say, you know what, when I start to grow, I feel that contention and I don't want that. Maybe I'm being too harsh on these people. Maybe I'm being judgmental. Maybe I'm not being humble enough. Maybe it's my ego, right? These are all temperature reductions in you trying to get to that next level, to raise yourself to the next level. And, you know, that level 1, it's quicksand. A lot of people don't realize it. The longer you stay in it, the lower you sink, and the farther from level 2 you get. It's an
energy drainer. I call those people energy drainers. I went to an event recently, and like I was just sitting there. Like you said, a lot of times we got to qualify people as like, they're not good. They're good people. They're not bad people. It's not about whether a person are good or bad, because we're both good and bad, right? Yeah. However, we may not be aligned. So I'm at this event, kind of super excited to go to the event, but I'm sitting there and I'm just like, this is weird, you know, and I couldn't put my finger. I'm like, this is really weird. You know, nothing was wrong. It was just like, why is it weird? And so I just sat there and they were having a good time. And, you know, I'm like, yeah, I'm cool. You know, I'm just relaxing. And, you know, I ultimately kind of pepped up, but it was a realization that I was those individuals several years ago, but I'm not that person now. And I just gave myself that grace that it's okay to occasionally, but you need to find your balance. To be around, it could be a family member, it could be a group of friends or associates, maybe for a social activity, but you need to be super aware of why you're in that space. So I was there for the entertainment, but that is not going to be where I'm going to be at on a consistent basis, because it would drain me, because I'm like, they do, I was like, they do this like all the time. And then I had to remind myself, you used to do this all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I like the way you framed it. It's not about good or bad. It's about alignment.
Mhm.
And I use something similar where I call it setting the perimeter, right? I started as a masculinity coach, found out that was kind of arrogant. Now I just help men with confidence, self-respect, and stepping into their power. But I also help just as many women as I do men, because the idea of alignment for me comes down to assets and liabilities. And when you're not aligned properly, everything becomes a liability. And what I
Right.
mean by that, it isn't to say, like people are material and all this stuff, but it's most men especially, and especially mothers, think that we have a finite resource battery,
Hmm.
right? We give to our tribes implicitly, and then we beat ourselves up when we're burnt out.
Right.
And the reason is because we didn't set the perimeter properly. We didn't say this is where the resources go. When things are luxurious and decadent and everything's going well, and the skies are blue and the birds are chirping, the resources can go wherever because you're in excess. But when it's thundering and there's a tornado coming and you have to batten down the hatches, or the wolves are at the gate, who gets your time then? Who gets your resources then? And that's where a lot of people don't set those boundaries.
Mhm.
And to your point, it's not their fault. It's not good, bad, or otherwise. It's an untrained skill set, right? Because
Exactly.
we're in this inclusive environment now where it's like everybody is equally important. It's like, yes, if everything's going well, you can make that decision to make everybody important. But what happens when you're in a low? What happens when you're struggling financially, struggling spiritually, struggling energy wise? You need to be able to determine that with the grace of it's okay. And that's where, you say alignment, I say set the perimeter. It's the same concept of like, you have to be able to identify when it's good for you to step into that space and it's not negatively affecting your priorities,
Mhm.
to your point, balance, and when it's not, right? Like I same thing. I like concerts. I haven't been to a concert in probably 4 years. Why? Mostly because that space isn't serving my priorities right now.
Right.
I love it. I can hang out with those people. I love the people that I go to concerts with, but I know that if I sink into that, I'm going to drink when I'm trying to be fit. I'm going to stay up real late when I should be working. I'm going to be at a concert. It's like, I'd much rather pour that energy into something else that has a higher priority in my life. And if you've aligned yourself properly, to use your language, the people that you do that with aren't going to have a problem with that.
Right.
They're going to realize you're on a different playing field from me right now, and that's okay. And you'll come back when it's ready. Right.
So you invest in what, a couple things. So you invest in what you value. In one of my books, actually, it was called Four Critical Habits to Overcome Burnout. The basic concept of the book is that people get burned out because they don't focus on what they value. They focus on checking boxes, right? They focus on, I got to reach this goal, instead of having values. And essentially what you and I just said was, we learned that no, it's nothing bad about concerts, nothing bad about having fun, but we value our businesses, we value our mission in life, or what have you. So you have to develop these skill sets, that what you said. And the second point I want to make is that there is no different kind of truth. There's only one truth. And so even though you and I have different languages, the truth is still the truth. So case in point, we're talking about these different levels and who we're around and how, we have to be careful. AA. So I'm very candid about me being a recovered alcoholic. I divorced alcohol, right? And so they teach you in AA, like when you get in there, although it didn't work for me because Dee has a little bit of ego. I didn't really follow my sponsor, but I followed the program. That doesn't mean you don't need a sponsor. I just had other things in place. But what I loved is they were like, don't go find you a sponsor that's 30 days into the program or 6 months into the program. You need someone that's 3 to 5 years sober and has really worked the program, right? And because by 5 years, if you haven't been drinking and you have some quality skill sets, then you're at a place where you can provide some support or be in an environment with another drunk. Okay. So it doesn't matter whether it's alcohol, whether it's relationships, whether it's weight management, whatever it is, if you're trying to lose weight, don't go get you can have an accountability partner, but don't get your buddy that's been on a date for 2 weeks to be giving you advice on how to lose weight. You know what I mean? You want
Yep.
to talk to the person that was killing it at the gym for the last 2 years.
Yep. Find people with the results you want.
Absolutely.
Sustainably. Right. And I like what you said there. The truth is the truth. And it's apparent the more I do these interviews and the more I connect with people, we all say the same things with different language. Right. And I've said this a lot. Like, I'm not for everybody because I'm intense as shit. Like when I do consultations with especially the men, I'm like, dude, I have zero patience. I'm not your buddy. I'm not your friend. I'm your coach. And some guys can't handle that. They want their ego stroked. They want to be validated, and that's fine. But that's not what I do. What I do is, and I'm very clear with them, is like, you're at a precipice. You're either going to jump or you're going to go back down the mountain. My job is to give you the skills to jump and know you'll be fine. That's what I do. So if you're sitting there on the top of the mountain going, I know something needs to change, but I'm going to be the guy going, jump. I got you. And that's okay. That's language that I can use and it will resonate with somebody. But you will speak a language that resonates with somebody that's completely different than me. But the truth is still within the language. The truth is still underlying it. And that's why there's so many correlatives. And I had this conversation earlier today. You know, I'm the type of person where I can identify truth when it's spoken, regardless of the vessel that it's spoken by.
Right.
And that's something that a lot of people have lost the ability to do. They create an archetype in their mind of who speaks what, right? When I started coaching men, I had guys tell me I couldn't be their coach because my beard wasn't long enough or that my voice wasn't deep enough. And I just laughed. I didn't know what else to do. I just laughed and, you know, it is what it is. But that's what we do. We create these archetypal individuals that need to do that. But the reality is, to your point, find somebody that's done it. Find somebody that's succeeded in that. Find somebody that carries themselves like that and lives it day to day. You're going to be far more gratified with the results and the experience than if you just find somebody who took a course on how to make 6 figures a month as an online coach, which I see a lot of. There's no weight to
That'll
it.
be your level one person. Your level one person, you know, is like, hey, you know, they got all the answers. You're sitting there, every problem you got, they got an answer. A level 2 person was like, well, I'm kind of working on this thing. I haven't really figured it out, but so far this is my result. A level 3 person says, hey, these are things that I've done. This is the results I got, but you got to do the work. And they're not going to be afraid to tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because now that you said that, it kind of clicked in my head. Like, sometimes you'll be all 3 at once. Just depends on the topic. Like for me, like I'm just thinking about my own life, the conversation I had with my VP. My priorities is not my fitness right now, but I have fitness clients
that
I'm helping get in shape. And he was talking smack to me and he was like, you know, so you're a do as I say, not as I do kind of person. I was like, well, no. And he's like, well, you are. And I was like, all right, fair enough. Now I got to get back in shape. So now I got to prioritize that because I have to be showing up for my clients, right? So I'm complacent there, but my growth mindset is my podcast. And like we talked about, I want to improve my production quality. But as a winner, confidence. I can be confident all day long. I can walk onto a stage and talk to anybody and everybody about that. So I can teach guys confidence all day long and how to step into their power. So there's sometimes you have to have part of that audit system is realizing, having the humility, which has kind of a bad connotation nowadays, but the humility to understand where you're a 1, where you're a 3, and where you're a 2, and be okay and give yourself the grace. Like, yeah, I've gotten complacent when it comes to
I've
this.
even challenged that, like, you know, and this is us kind of exploring together. I feel like at this stage in my life, I'm not treading in ones. You know, I might be a low 2. I hear what you're saying. What you're essentially communicating is, hey, I need a swift kick in the butt right here in this particular area. But the self-awareness that you have that, hey, I haven't prioritized certain things, a level 1 is doing that.
Fair enough. No, that's a fair point. Yeah, that's a fair point. Because to your point, they'd be a know-it-all.
Right. Yeah, I'm
They
good.
wouldn't be
Like,
able
what
to
are you
receive
talking
that.
about? I've lost over 50 pounds. What are
Yeah,
you talking
yeah.
about?
They wouldn't be able to receive that feedback in a constructive way.
Absolutely.
That's fair. Yeah, I might. No, that's a good point. Yeah, again, we're talking and thinking. You know, and that's a good point. I'll never be a 1 again. You'll never be a 1 again. And to the point of this, and I've talked about this with a number of people. When you're around 1s, no matter how much you love them, there's a certain part of you that just can't relax.
No,
There's a
you
certain,
can't unsee it. You can't
yeah,
unsee the fact that
yeah,
we know that this other level is there. Like we were once there, and when we came out of it, it's so blatantly uncomfortable. It's like just like the mastermind groups and networking groups that we're in.
yeah,
If a one shows up to the group, they stick out like a sore thumb. Like, how did you get in
yeah, 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 because they're the odd man out.
here? Right. And
Yeah.
not
But
like,
to the same token, when you go to those masterminds like the one you went to, or whatever that event was where you were uncomfortable, now everyone is sticking out as that, and you're feeling like the odd man out because you're like, there's something off here. I don't
right.
fit here. And it's kind of an interesting thing that now that you're talking about it, like, and going back to that love of those people, like especially people that you've come up with, right? Like I grew up in the hood, like it was all about the loyalty of that space, right? And out of that love for that camaraderie that we went through hell together, I want to bring them with me. But not everybody's going to make it to level 2. Not everybody's able to, or that's not their journey, or I'm not part of that journey. And I have to give myself the grace that it's a lot easier to get pulled down than it is to pull people up. And if you don't want to be pulled down, sometimes you have to let them find their own way and protect your energy. You can be in the space, but you're never going to allow yourself to be a one again. And it's a very tangible feeling inside. You're just kind of like,
you know your worth. Like once you
yeah,
come out of one, you know your worth. You may still struggle with issues of self-worth. I would be lying if I don't say sometimes I have to. We talk about this conversation, right? I call it the board meeting in your head. You have this dialogue in your head. But even having that dialogue in my head, I know that I'm worth so much more than being complacent. I know that this thing that we have a very short amount of time in called life has a lot for me to explore, and I can't unsee that.
yep. And to that same token, I'm in the same place where it's like nobody's going to stop me from seeing it now, right? Like that victim mindset shifting to a victor. Once you flip that switch and, like you said, make that decision, I can't be a victim now, because that would require me to give them control, and I can't fathom that, because I've seen the other side of the curtain. I've seen behind the Wizard of Oz curtain, right? Like I know what the levers are. I know what's happening now. I know that anywhere I want to go is within my control, within my power, and therefore I can never go back to saying it didn't happen because of X person. That person is me. There's no other person that could have let that happen, because I'm never going to allow them control over that life anymore. And it is freeing. But I think I've seen a lot of times, especially with clients, where spouses don't come with, friends don't come with, people don't see it. That's where the struggle comes in. But once that switch is flipped, it's flipped, and you can't go back.
I'll give you this last little kind of technique, because you asked me about techniques and it came to my mind that, and we're talking about grace, right? It's like, how do you do this thing? You know, how do you stay at a 2 or get to the 3 and not go back to the 1? You course correct. So in the moment, I can start saying something sometimes and play victim, right? And I'll catch myself, like one of the little posts I did the other day was like, where do we get this concept of that we need something? We don't need anything. The universe has everything that we want. We want something, right? And so when I'm like, I need somebody to go do this, or I need this, that's victim, right? In the moment, I catch myself. Me and my girlfriend, a friend of mine, one of my best friends, went out Friday, and I was sitting there telling her about this concept, and we we're all excited. And I was like, yeah. And so I was like, I need them to bring me so and so and so. You know, talking about the restaurant. I'm like, no, I want them to bring me this drink. So in the moment, you course correct. Instead of trying to get this down to perfection, let's focus on progress. In the moment, you start seeing yourself play victim, course correct. That's it. Just like you're driving in a car, course correct.
Yep. And it's cool because, like, you say that, and you end up surrounding yourself with people that help you course correct constructively, right? I was talking about belief with one of my good friends, and he's like, do you mean hope? And I was like, fuck no, I don't mean hope. Hope is bullshit. And he's like, just checking, just making sure, because we have this whole idea that hope is a dream. Belief is a concept that we can actually manage and make tangible. And so once you start to live unapologetically, to use your words, and you start to be convicted and plant your flag, like, this is who I am, This is where I want to go. Everything else starts to like align better. You start to know what that alignment looks like because you're not questioning yourself. So it's like, okay, like before you have that alignment of yourself, before you know yourself, before you write your own story or your origin story or whatever, you almost had this, well, I don't know, maybe I'm just being this or maybe I'm that. Once you have that and you're like, no, this is the way it is. This is where I'm going. This is what I believe in. You no longer have that question or conversation in your head of what you need. You now are just like, I need me and I need to stay aligned with me. And that's the only need I have. And then past that, if you don't get on board, I'm still me. I'm still over here. I'll do this. You could add value where you can. And that's where that course correction starts getting simpler.
So much easier. It's flow. That's all. That's essentially what the quickest way to say that is flow. It's like now, before it was like, well, maybe I should be over here with these people, maybe, and then you're that because you're not trusting yourself, because if you're victimized, you don't really trust yourself, right? Because this thing happened to me, with the story. But after a while, you start saying, nah, I don't. I call it my internal or If I don't get a D ain't doing it.
Yep. And that goes back to that there's only one truth. And something you said earlier that really made sense to me is like a lot of people are emotionally maligned to what they truly want because of the check boxes. Now, I mentioned it earlier, my ex-wife, again, good person. I took my responsibility for what happened. I allowed that relationship to fall apart. And the reason was because I was checking boxes that weren't mine to check. They were society's check boxes. Get married, get the house, the nice car, have a steady career. And I get done and I have all these boxes checked and I'm like, I'm fucking miserable. Why am I miserable? I checked all these boxes. And it took me a year. And I went to her the year before and I said, listen, this isn't working. I'm depressed. This isn't working for me. We need to find another way. And it never got better because 1 and a 2 didn't work. I was a 2 looking for something more and they were a 1 checking boxes and happy to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that works for you, fine, but it doesn't work for me. And so that's when I realized I never created my own check boxes.
Right.
I was just adopting other people's check boxes. Going back to what you said, I was compartmentalized because of a survival skill of my upbringing. I didn't look internally and go, what do I even want? And I was having that conversation of like, is it okay for me to want that? Am I allowed to want that? Is it normal for me to want that? And these are conversations I know for a fact men have constantly, especially men who are fathers and men who are in long-term relationships. They question whether or not they're allowed to have the desires that they have. And to your point earlier, you either do or you don't. There's no right or wrong. It's just, is it aligned with who you are? And you need to start figuring out what that looks like. And the sooner you can be honest about that, the sooner you know what you want, to your point, the more flow you're going to get.
I love how you took responsibility of, that this relationship didn't work because you didn't want it. It's not like, oh, it's her fault. Like, here's my story, right? Before, my story was, yeah, I was in this type of relationship, and this, You ask me now, and I'm like, oh, I was married twice and I've been divorced twice. It just didn't work for me, right? It's a shorter story. It didn't work for me. Now, the challenge was it took me years to acknowledge that and break off all the isms. So now my story is different. Like, I don't have to give you this whole long, Cinemax kind of a thing about, because I'll say this again, it's a general thing, but like Americans love the climax. Like, we love the story. We love the drama. Right? No, it just didn't work. And that's why many people, I can't tell you how many people have come to me and they're like, they've been married for 20 plus years. And then they're like, they're ready to end the relationship because they've told themselves the story that they have to stay married in order for their kids to be okay. Okay, well, what about all the single parents out there that raise kids and their kids are doing just fine? Like, let's add more to that story. So I just really want to acknowledge you for like, no, this divorce didn't happen because of my ex-wife. It's what I wanted.
Yeah. And, there was a lot, it wasn't immediate, right? Like to be, you know, and I appreciate that you had acknowledged that, but it wasn't immediate.
Mhm.
It was the hardest, most guilt-ridden, shameful decision that I've ever had to make.
Oh, I know that.
And it was because I felt that I was making a very selfish decision.
Right.
I committed to this human. I'm all about integrity. Anybody that's watched me for a while, anybody that's followed me understands that my cornerstone virtue is integrity. And so when I made that decision, no matter how I felt internally about why or whatever justifications I made, it felt selfish and it felt like I had lied. It felt like I had made a promise and I wasn't holding up my end of the bargain. And it was very difficult. And from that came the shame, and that shame created blame, right? From shame comes blame. I didn't mean to rhyme like Dr. Seuss, but it came out that way. And so, you know, that's what ended up happening is I was like, well, you didn't do this and you did this to me. And the reality was I wasn't comfortable being me. So
Right.
I allowed her the opportunity to put me in a box. Did she make decisions that weren't the best? Who gives a shit? I allowed those to happen. That was I should have been strong enough to say, this isn't working for me, and had the conviction in myself to say, this isn't what I want, but I
Right.
didn't. And so none of that ownership is on her, right? Whatever she wants to own, that's for her to decide. That's not for me to decide. For me to decide is looking at it internally and going, why didn't this work? And that shame made me not want to tell people I was divorced for a long time.
Oh, I
Like I
kept
was
the secret
afraid.
for years.
Yeah, I was afraid, and I luckily was surrounded by amazing humans. My business partner at the time, our clothing line, we actually shut down after COVID, but we were in a business partnership together, and I was meeting him for dinner, and he's like, dude, something's wrong. And I had my bag packed. I hadn't told him what was going on. I had my bag packed. I didn't know where I was going to go. I was just meeting him for dinner, and he's like, something's wrong. What's up? And I'm like, no, let's just talk business. We weren't friends at the time. We were business partners. That's all we wanted to be. Well, that's all I wanted us to be. And he's like, 10 minutes goes in. He's like, no, something's off. What's up? I'm like, just business, man. And he was like, okay. And then 20 minutes after that is about 40 minutes into the meeting. He's like, fuck it. Okay, I'm done. What is going on? And I tell him the story. He's like, all right, well, I already texted my wife, coming home to stay with me. You're going to crash in our extra bedroom. Don't even worry about it, blah, blah, blah. For the next 5 days, I laughed harder than I had laughed in 10 years because I was free to be myself with them because they accepted me for who I was. And it was in that moment, I allowed them to see that part of me because I didn't fear it.
Right.
Whereas I had gotten to a point where I was fearing it with my old relationship. I was fearing her rejection. I was fearing, and that's where I realized that integrity is the number one underlying issue in relationships across the board.
I
Not
love what you're talking about relationships. So check this out. You asked me about the book earlier, and the way that I start the book off, and this wasn't a plug, but it's going to be a plug, but it was more to what you were saying. Marriage, okay, is a legal contract. That's all that it is. How many of us break legal contracts? You didn't pay a bill on time, something in school, you signed up
contract, speeding ticket.
right? All of this stuff, we break it all the time. Contracts get broken.
Yep.
All right. And so when you get into a marriage, it's like this legal contract. It's, are you going to fill up your end of the bargain? Am I going to fill up my end of the bargain? That is nothing to build on. However, if you build a relationship, like what we're doing right now is building relationship. There's no pretenses about what this is going to look like. We're just showing up and we're just being who we are. Tim's being him, Dr. Dees being her. It's not like, okay, look, we're going to do this podcast and you're going to talk this much and I'm going to do this.
That's
and now,
exactly why I don't do that.
right?
I want organic, non-mechanistic conversation.
But if it was that, it wouldn't be this great energy that's going here, right? And so that's what happens, and that's why these marriages don't work. Now, if you need your legal contract at some other point, that's fine, but people don't build on that. It's like, oh, okay, I went to school, I got my education, I get this, now I have to sign that contract, as opposed to, hey, I want to be in companionship or a relationship with another human.
Yeah, 100%. And that was my error early on too, as a youth and coming out of the military, and it was just a box to check, and the marriage was a forced step. And I say forced because it took convincing on my part, because it was the next step. And that would have been a red flag if I didn't, as a survival mechanism, compartmentalize good from bad as what I learned growing up. So any of the bad red flags, I just kind of like put over there. And then I was like, oh, the good stuff, it's all cherries on top and everything's great. I've learned that mechanism about myself. But it was the lack of integrity on my end to hold to who I was in order for that to work, and letting the chips lie where they lie. And we, to your point, Americans especially, love the story. They love the toxicity. How many women have broken up with the dude because he's too nice? How many men have broken up with a chick because there isn't enough chaos, right? We love the emotional roller coasters, right? But the reality is, once I started to realize, like, okay, I've been using somebody else's checklist, and I don't give a flying fuck about this, and this. Well, what do I do care about? And then I started asking that question. And then that question led me to go and ask my partner at the time, like, what do you think about this? And them being completely polar opposite from me, where I'm like, I like being an adventurer. You like being sedentary. Like, how are we going to make this work? Do you mind if I adventure on my own? And then it became a jealousy issue, right? So now we have an incompatibility. To your point, on contract, I said I'd be faithful. We didn't get into the weeds to talk about what does that actually mean? How do we define that? What social contract are we actually entering into? Right. And so that was a failure on my part to articulate my needs that has nothing to do with her. And as much as it hurt, right? And I took the shame, the guilt or whatever, I broke it off because it served nobody for me to stick in around for that and burn myself out for an individual that didn't even know who I was.
What I love about your core values that you share with me for your first one, I wrote it down, you said was honor. And that is the cure to all things in a nutshell, is to honor ourselves. Okay. And that is what dogma or social programming keeps people from doing. That board meeting in their head oftentimes is not even their own voice. So go back, I always say this because it happens every single time I say it, bring the thing full circle. So you asked me in the beginning of this call, you said, tell me about your story. And I said that this lady gave me permission or gave me my voice back, right? And what was happening is, through my upbringing, through the trauma, through the this and it is, I had all these other voices and I didn't recognize what my voice was. So I didn't honor it. And so at the end of the day, now Dee can hear from Dee loud and clear. Dee know when there's some disruption or some feedback, right? Or some problems in the matrix. And so that to be able to tap into my voice is really to be able, meaning to honor myself. So you walking away from that relationship had nothing to do with this lady and everything to do with you honoring yourself. Me walking away from 2 marriages, while it helped grow and develop me leaving, taking too long to leave was dishonoring myself. But me leaving was honoring myself because I didn't want to be there. I didn't. That's it.
Yep.
Contract broken. Should I or shouldn't I have is not relevant as much as I didn't want to be there anymore. Why am I still staying there? Oh, because you're going to be a single mom. Oh, you're going to be a single mom again. Oh, you got 4 kids. Oh, you're married and you're in the church and you're in a minister. All the reasons why you have to stay, except the real reason is I need to leave because I'm honoring me.
Yeah. And I have the question of honoring myself is the same no matter what situation I'm in, no matter what relationship I'm in. Can I do this for 15, 20, 30 years? As is, right? Because a lot of these conversations, and I had this conversation with myself a lot leading up to the end of that relationship, was very much, well, if they do this, then yes. If this happens, then yes. No, with the information you have available to you, as is, can you exist in this space for the next 30 years? Most times, if you're having that conversation, the answer is going to be no. Mm-hmm. Then the follow-up question is, what would need to change? Can you communicate that effectively?
I think we put too much pressure on ourselves even with this. Now, hear me out. This, because it goes back to this contract of be married till death do us part and your ass might change in 5 years, Okay, so I can't tell you if I'm gonna be with you till death do you part. Now, ideally, I'm looking for someone to be in a relationship because I don't want to have to go back through this dating phase again. But I'm not gonna put the pressure on myself to have to answer a question, or am I gonna be with you 30 years from now? I don't know. If you're worthy to be with me in 30 years, if I'm worthy to be with you in 30 years, and I'm not saying not to think, okay, is this a long-term partner? Just what I'm saying is to pull back the dogma, just like checking the boxes, the dogma of this has to be my happily ever after. That's the bullshit that we got caught up in.
But I think, like, I'm a hopeless romantic. So I believe in the ideal and the construct of till death do us part. And so I date for that. Like, I don't date for tomorrow. And I've never been able to do that. Like, I'm just going to get real candid here, which I don't really usually do on this podcast, but I'm going to do it. Fuck it. I don't date. I've had like 5 women my whole life. Like, I don't date for casual. I date for a queen, because my queen's going to either build my kingdom or burn it down. That's how I function. I know that for a fact. I'm going to give a lot of respect and power.
With that. But how, if you look at history, right? How many times in history can you see that even when someone had a queen, sometimes that queen got debunked and they got a new queen? So I'm not saying not to
not at all
be in a relationship with intention. What I'm just saying is mental. I'm coming from a mental health perspective. From a mental health perspective, some of us be trying to make whole life decisions at the gas pump, and we just need to put some gas in the car. When
That's
we put
true.
it in a relationship, yes, I need to be making just like a business, I need to be making some long-term plans, but do I need to put the pressure on myself if I want to start a business? Is my business going to be up 30 years from now? Who knows, right?
Yeah. And I think yes, 100%, I agree with you, right? And I think we're talking from a couple different ends, right? That audit has to be, is that something that you even want, right? Without the dogma, without like I know I have plenty of friends that are, polyamorous and, have open relationships, and
right.
I don't fucking understand them. I don't. I physically and mentally and spiritually, I don't understand. I respect the fuck out of them. I just don't get it. I could not function that way. Me. For them, great. So that honoring yourself is really knowing what do you want and what do you need and what do you desire, and going full circle to that honesty and quieting all the other voices. Mm-hmm. And to your point, like that conversation of like, can I handle this for 30 years? That's coming from my place of like, that's what I'm looking for, is I need to be able to not resent you in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And if I can't, then I need to address it. That's my audit system, because that's what I want. But if you don't even give a shit about that long, or you're just, let's deal with today, then your audit system is going to be quite different. But you got to honor that voice. You got to quiet all the other stuff, the dogma, the social pressures, the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, all that shit needs to stop. And it needs to just be, what does Dr. D need right now? What does Tim Bass need right now? Like, what is it that I desire? And what am I willing to give up? If like, is my life going to be ended without it, or positive or negative? Like, that voice has to be the absolute number one loudest speaker. And we both have a very similar story where that wasn't the case. Right. We forfeited that voice to outsourced volumes to other people. And it could have been several people, it could have been one person, could have been society as a general rule. But I think if I was to wrap up our entire conversation into one thing, it is honor yourself by listening to your own voice and become like laser focused on becoming aligned with what you want.
Ruthlessly committed to it.
Just absolutely ruthlessly committed to it, because everything else becomes flow from that point forward.
Yep.
Wow. I want to be respectful of your time. I really appreciate this conversation. I knew we'd have an awesome conversation, and that's exactly what happened here. I will be getting your information after the call to get into the description. If you aren't following Dr. D, you need to be following Dr. D. You need to pick up her book. You need to make sure that you're engaging with her. And if you're struggling with assertiveness, mindset, any of the above that we've talked about throughout this entire hour some odd podcast, please reach out to her. I know she can help you. And any last things that you'd like to share for the audience before we close up, Dr. D?
I just want to thank you for giving me access to your platform and having like real conversation with me. I live for that. I live for vulnerability, and at the end of the day, the work that you and I do, we're really good at what we do because we're vulnerable. We have a story, but our story is that new vulnerability. And so I just want to thank you for having me.
It was my absolute pleasure. My absolute pleasure. And this is why I do what I do, is these conversations are what gasses me up, is what makes me super energized. I don't like mechanistic. I don't like question and answer interviews. I like organic conversations because, as we mentioned before, humans think through talk. I mean, we worked through a number of things that I've taken notes that I now have to reintegrate, re-reconcile because,
a lot.
exactly, because you challenge the way that I approached it, or and that if I was to say the importance of podcasts, a good podcast does just that. And it should challenge your thinking, and it should cause you to re-audit and re-course correct based on new information. And that's all I want to give my platform and my audience, and then self-servingly, it allows me to grow and expand my thought process, my repertoire, and increases my skill level for my clients. So I really appreciate everything we talked about today. And I'm super excited. As always, if you guys liked what we talked about, make sure to go and follow our interviewer or our interview guests. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share. We grow as you let us grow. One of the things that has been asked about is, how do you help us with our larger vision? That's been an ongoing conversation from a number of you that have been watching for a while. I am working on a really cool thing to try and give back to you guys and have you guys be able to engage with the community, including getting Q&As offered to you guys, extra lives, and then also give you the opportunity to financially support the new vision of the larger facility and what we're trying to put together in the next couple of years. So thanks for everybody that's followed. Thank you, Dr. D. Really appreciate you taking the time. And we'll check you next time on Heroes Veritas. Have a great one, guys. You speak.